Hi. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to SocialCode Times Products. I'm Colin, so I'm the one who've all been getting emails from the last few weeks. Sorry for that. So thanks everyone for coming along. So I think a few of you have seen it previous events and a few new faces. So thanks for coming along. Tonight, we'll bring you 3 speakers. So we've got, well, first things first, I'll just go through the ethos of our event. So ultimately, SocialCode was founded on the basis that it's a community. We're here to share knowledge, and at the same time, we take feedback from you guys on topics you want to hear about, hence the encouraging of feedback. Obviously, the community aspect, what we try to do, and hopefully you've seen by coming here tonight, is give everyone a chance to kind of network. Obviously, a little bit of a social element to it as well, hence SocialCode. So I'm Colin. I recruit for product owners and product managers in the Northwest. There's my socials there, so if any of you want to add me or drop me an email after the event and have a chat, if you're looking for work or looking to hire, I'm your man. And our first speaker tonight will be Michael. Communication and why this should be every product manager's priority. Then we've got Evie, and she'll be talking about, it's quite a long title this, so I've had to write this one out, how product teams can demonstrate their value to C-suite. And finally, we've got Dan. So Dan came to our last event and was the first person to approach me about speaking at this event. So keen, I like it. And he'll be talking about the impact and potential of design systems for systemic and cultural change, a product perspective. Is it? So Dan's talk, very interesting, because I think it just gives a very different perspective on the product way of doing things. So I will hand over to Michael. Enough of my waffling on.
Bit awkward, isn't it? Yeah. Hi everyone. You okay? I'm Michael. Just going to start off by lowering expectations. I had a really difficult night last night and I didn't get to sleep till 3 o'clock. So if I start slurring my words or talking nonsense, please bear with me. Ironically, I'm here to talk about communication. So let's see how it goes. So I want to talk about communication and why I think it should be every product manager's top priority. But who am I? I'm him. I'm recently started a new role at the BBC, where I'm a senior product manager. Prior to that, I worked at the UK Civil Service for the Department of Education. I started there as an associate product manager. After about a year, I got promoted into being a fully blown product manager, and I wasn't shadowing people anymore. And I was there for about 3 years before I've come to the BBC. I've joined the BBC's design system team, so I am really excited to hear Dan's talk later, because Dan is like the man when it comes to design systems, so I'll certainly be listening. And outside of work, I enjoy running with various degrees of success. And Evie and I, we've recently started a podcast. I've got a QR code there. If anyone is interested, please do take a picture, or these slides will be sent around afterwards. We're trying to talk to real everyday life product managers. Myself and Evie realised that some of the product podcasts, it's there's product superstars, and it can sometimes feel a bit intimidating, but we want to talk to people like ourselves on the ground doing the job and actually talk about what it's like. It's a bit of therapy if anyone's interested. And bizarrely, Evie and I didn't know we were both talking at this until we saw the things go on LinkedIn, oh, you're doing this too. We didn't speak about that. So getting into the actual talk itself, we're surrounded by a sea of stakeholders, in my opinion. When I was at DFE, I wanted to think about, well, how many stakeholders do we actually have? And I just really quickly drew something on pen and paper, put myself in the middle, and then who's the next person I have to deal with? And I was well, that's my team. And I kind of put that in a little walled garden. And then around that, I quickly put down some people who I need to communicate with and tell what I'm doing, or people I'd like to communicate with. And quite quickly it grew to this. And it's that's a lot of people, and a lot of different people, and a lot of different levels of interest in what we're doing. And it's that's hard to communicate to that many people. And that was only like a really quick sketch. Like I probably could have gone on and on. And the thing is, like, if you're not thinking about how you communicate with these people, bad things happen. And I'm going to touch on that in a little bit. But if you spend some time getting it right, then the reverse of that's true, and you can make your life and your team's life a lot easier. So first and foremost, what are the pitfalls of poor communication? So complaints about lack of direction. And with this can be like within the team. Sometimes I think I've certainly early in my career made the mistake of thinking I've got to know what the vision is, and I need to go away in a little dark room, write this vision on this document, and cool, I've got a vision. But like, even if I've got the best vision or strategy or anything in my head, if my team don't live and breathe that and know like what they're trying to do and what we're all about together, then quite quickly you start hearing people say that like, I don't really know what we're trying to do here. I don't know the direction. And that quite quickly, like those grumblings can be like a very difficult thing in a team. It just gets a bit tense and aggy, basically. Also, if your senior leadership or your stakeholders, whoever, aren't hearing from you, like people like to like be reassured that things are going okay. And if you're not communicating with them, everyone starts assuming the worst. It's human nature. It's like, well, I'm not hearing from them, so they must be doing either nothing or something terrible. And what you start finding is people start getting all up in your grill. And who wants that? It's a shit place to be. Also, like I know in the teams I've worked in, it's like quite big organizations. So there's quite often like multiple teams working on things. And if our team are working on something and not communicating about that, then there's quite a large percentage chance that there's another team over there doing the same thing, or they could block you if you don't tell them you're doing this thing. So by not broadcasting that out, you're not surfacing those opportunities to find dependencies. Yeah, and similar as well, like you could be working on the same stuff and one of you could do that, save yourself a load of time, and they could work on something else. And yeah, this one, I like this one. Users don't know your product exists. So before I got into before I got into product, I worked in marketing. And when I came into the civil service, one of the first teams I was in as an associate, we were building this product and it was going to be launched in a few months. And I think I still very much had like my marketing hat on, and I was saying, when this is built, like, how are people going to know about this? And I got told, oh, it'll be okay. Like, don't worry about that. It'll be fine. So I was like, oh, okay. There must be something that goes on in government, like something that they do at the end that's really clever. There wasn't. Like, no one knew about the product when it was launched. And then the ministers were like, well, how come no one's using it? And I was just thinking, yeah, that was obvious that no one's going to use it. But again, if you're not thinking about like, how do we communicate that these things exist? And especially with all the stuff in the news right now about product marketing and Airbnb and stuff, like you need to be thinking about these things, like not just within your organization, but actually how do people find the product? So flipping that on its head, like what are the benefits of communication? The opposite, team feel bought in. Ideally, they've helped shape the direction that you're going to take, and it's been a thing that you all do together as a team. So they feel bought in, they know what they're doing, they're motivated, everyone's coming to work every day. I've got like a strong ethos that the thing that bonds teams more than anything else is solving common problems. Like, don't get me wrong, a Zoom quiz is great, but like I think getting together and actually like solving something together is what builds connection, and people like actually want to come in. So people can't do that if they don't know what they're all there to do. Rather than stakeholders knocking at your door saying like, where's this up to? What's this happening? Can you just explain this to me? If you're on the front foot and telling them like what you're doing and communicating little and often, quite often like they back off. I saw this tweet once, which is like, if you get to a point where every time you speak to a stakeholder, it feels like common sense to them, it means that you've done a really good job of explaining what your narrative is, because they're with you every step of the way. And if you can get to that place, it just makes things a lot easier. Yeah, if you're communicating with other teams, if these things crop up, there's mitigation there. You can, spot things early and do things to change course. I put here it's easier to share ideas. What I really mean is steal. Like if you're saying like, oh, we're doing this thing, and this team's like, oh, we did that. It's like, cool, I'll take that code. Nice one. And yeah, lastly, like that flip thing on its head, like people find out about your product and it's being used, because that's what we're all trying to achieve, right? Like putting something in front of whoever our users is and help solve a problem. So with like the pitfalls in communication, yeah, the benefits of communication, I want to go into like some tips. So this is when I started in product as an associate, which for those who don't know, you kind of like an apprentice, I'd say. Like I was seconded to a product manager. I'd work in that team for like a number of weeks or months, and then I'd be moved to a different team, different part of the business, and build up my skill set. And probably like the best product manager I worked with, and the one who like spent quite a lot of time giving me good advice, he said this was the best piece of product advice he'd ever been given. Be the person at the front telling everyone else about the plan. And I was like, be on about? Didn't get it. Didn't quite know what he meant. And eventually, like, he started explaining what it meant more. And I did start getting it then. And I'll try and explain what I believe it to mean now, and why I think it's also the most important piece of product advice I've been given. He was going back to that point about stakeholders like wanting to know information. Let's say you join a new team. Our job as product managers, or one of them in my opinion, is to see what the narrative is and create that narrative. So if you see that there's quite a lot of user problems and there's problems that you can fix, you might not know how to fix them at this point. But rather than going back to what I said before and going into a dark room and spending months working on this thing and no one knows what's happening, be there really early and like get your ideas down. Like, these are the problems as I see them, and these are some things that we might want to try to do to fix it, and come out and just say to your stakeholders, look, this is the lay of the land as I see it, and these are some of the things I'm thinking about to try and change it. What do you think about that? Now, if you do that, you're not putting yourself in the position where you have to have all the right answers. You're just like giving them an opportunity to come into that space and either give you information you might not know. They could be someone from finance saying, oh, have you considered this X, Y, and Z that you might not have known about? Or they say, yeah, that's actually a really good idea. Like, why don't you do this? Or have you spoke to this person? If you're not communicating early and being the person at the front saying, this is the direction I'm thinking about taking, you don't give your stakeholders that opportunity to come in and help shape that. And what you can do is you can bring the stakeholders with you on that journey so that they're helping you to shape it and they're with you every step of the way, rather than them being this thing that's like us and them. So yeah, the next thing, this is a Steve Jobs quote, the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. And I think like that's a really important part of our jobs. Like, quite often we work in really complex spaces. It's hard, right? If it wasn't hard, people wouldn't be wanting to pay us money to try and do it. And I found this image like kind of spoke to what I was trying to say quite well. Like, I think our job is to take this jumbled mess of all things that are discombobulated and actually make a narrative that you can go in and you can explain to someone easily. Because if you can bring people on, like, they're more likely to get behind you with that. So with storytelling, what kind of tools do we have at our disposal as product people to help with that? So number one, in my opinion, is vision statements. This is when I was at DFE, an example of a product vision I had for one of the products we were working on. I'm not saying this is like amazing, but it helped me. Like, we make it quicker and easier for academies to belong to a trust. Like, that's what the thing is. And then so that regional colleagues, teachers, leaders can focus on improving the quality of information, education. And that second bit was the why. And what I found was, like, by having this, I could point at this quite quickly. If a senior leader's like, what's your team about? This is what we're trying to achieve. And this lined up with what the business was trying to achieve as well. But in some ways, more importantly, like, multidisciplinary teams are great because you've got diverse set of ideas and opinions and perspectives. But multidisciplinary teams are also really annoying because you've got a diverse set of opinions, perspective, and stuff like that. And what I mean by that is, like, someone can get really excited and go, oh, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. And it's taking you like a mile away over here. Having this at the start to be like, yeah, but this is why we're here, yeah? I found it like a really useful tool to like bring people back on if they were going too far, like out of what you were trying to achieve. The The next thing is visual thinking, and I laughed to myself because this example is like not that visual, is it? But it really helped the situation I was in. So like, just to give you some context about what this is, I was trying to, when I was still at DFE, introduce this strategy. I was confident about the strategy. In my head, I was like, yeah, this is what we need to do and this will work. And initially I'd written this like big paper document, this like 10-page thing. And I just thought, I'm just going to send this to everyone. Everyone's going to just read it and be like, yeah, this is what we need to do. Great, cracked it. And I sent it to everyone and just no one cared. And I was deeply offended, to tell you the truth. But then I started realizing that, okay, well, I still believe in this. The problem's on me. How can I change it? And I found that just doing this, taking it away from this document and putting it into this 3-block thing with some basic icons, it meant that I could talk it through with people and they'd get it. And then it became, I was so proud of this at the end because after a few months, people started using this language like, oh yeah, but we can't do that in phase 1 because we're going to start doing that when we move into Automate. And no, I think that's more of an innovation thing. And I realized that like I'd succeeded in my task of this being this document that only I understood, and it became accepted. And that was like a really nice place to get to. And I don't think I'd have got there if I hadn't come up with something to simplify and present it visually. And it's like, on a side note with that, just the process I took to get here, I think is worth touching on. And this is again something that like a mentor said to me. He said, in his opinion, like part of our role as product is we're afforded time to think, right? Hopefully. I know there's like Slack and all this madness going on, but one of the reasons why businesses hire us is to do some deep level thinking about it. So what I try and do is like take all the information, all the research, all the quants, everything you can get and bring it together and it's like let it, percolate and eventually think, like, what do I think the strategy should be? And that's number one. The next thing I want to do is take it out a circle and start bringing my team into it and getting my team to like shape that vision, strategy, whatever, and get it so that they're bought in. And once you've got to that place, the next thing is like, right, we're aligned as a team about what we're trying to do. Now we need to tell all them, like all the stakeholders that are putting that first thing. And yeah, just having something visual is a helpful way of doing that. This is some more like basically this presentation is just advice I've been given that I'm passing off at my own here, like you might have realized, but like planning your outcomes. So when I was an associate, I'd realized that like, oh, in order for us to do XYZ, I need to speak to that person and I'd book a meeting with that person. I wouldn't have a clear agenda. I'd just have a meeting. And this busy person in the business would sometimes reject it because like, don't know what this is, no. Or sometimes they'd accept it. And then I'd get there and I wouldn't have a plan. I'd just be like, hi. And then I'd just start like talking. I'd be nervous because it was someone senior. I'd just be like chatting absolute nonsense. And one of these senior people in the business, it was a director, they gave me some really good constructive feedback. They said like, plan your outcomes. Said like, what you should be looking to do when you have more calls like this is decide like what information you need from me or what decision you need from me or whatever it is. You put this call in for something. So have in your head, this is at the end of this call, I need to get to this place. Have that on a post-it note above your desk as like a visual reminder and set the whole meeting up. So the whole purpose of that half an hour is you to get to this place where you want to get to. So have it in the agenda. This is clearly what I want from you in this half an hour. Have it in like all the questions that you're asking, you're scaffolding up to build to like getting the outcomes that you want. And just having that like structure and having what I now consider to be courtesy for that person's time as well, that they can come into that space, give you what you need and then go quite quickly. I've just found it's made my personal relations with people a lot better. And then finally, last thing I want to touch on is stakeholder mapping. So a lot of those things I've spoken about are quite like the concepts, but I want to like bring it down a level. And going back to that graphic I showed at the start, that rough sketch of all the stakeholders, this is something that I've been, as I mentioned, I'm like 2 months into a new job and it's a new product function where I am. There's not been product in this area. And quite quickly, it's like everyone's mentioning all these different teams and individuals. And it's like, I need to get away to like get all these people and all these names into some sort of system. So first and foremost, it's like, I quite enjoy this bit. It's like you're a detective, and like I set up like a team meeting, and it was like, right, everyone is a Miro board. Who are all the people who speak to us? Who are all the people that we speak to? Who are the people who we want to speak to, who we don't? Go. And like let the team just like populate all that. And you know, it's quite a good activity. People say, oh yeah, that person. And quite quickly there was like a big board with all different post-it notes. And then the next thing after that is like to then start trying to put in some theming around that. And then after you've done that theming, really simple, like 2x2 grid of, right, so we've got all the people that we want to speak to. Let's say like who's got like a high level of power and who's got a lot of interest in this, and start to put people in different categories. And I wanted to share this slide, but I didn't have time to like change it. But basically, when we did this, most of our stakeholders were here. We had like some here, few there, but like these were our bread and butter, and these were less so. And like people in like keep informed or monitor were like tended to be like high up, who like, you know, you're not going to go to like the director and be like, I'm doing this next week. They're like, don't really care, but they want to know general direction. And with that, you've got these people, you've now got them all mapped as to who they are. And then the next thing is, right, so what do we need to actually do with these people now? And this is like the fun bit. Using this, it was like, right, we need to make a communications plan that details how we're actually going to start speaking to these people. So everyone in this block started saying, well, who actually are these people? And they tended to be I won't go into details too much, but I work on an internally facing team. So there's different product teams that serve the audiences at BBC, like the news app, the sport app. I work on a product that those teams use. So it's like, right, well, most of the people who we need to speak with quite a lot are these capability teams. Down here is like the high up managers who like probably need to know generally where we're going, but they don't want to know the details, and so on and so forth. Just like understood who was in which one. And then it was like, right, well, what kind of communication do we need to serve each group? So with like this one, like the bread and butter one, it was like, this needs to be a regular steering group. This needs to be like a monthly thing where I get all these people in a room and we present like, this is our roadmap. This is what we're working on. Find out what's on all their roadmaps, get them all together, see if there's any things that like, oh, actually you're working on that thing, so we should prioritize this, or you're both working on this, so maybe this thing on our roadmap needs to go higher. Without having this structure and this way of going about it, like that wasn't gonna happen. Like you have to put some planning in and some like thinking and some processes to get to a place where rather than just having this morass of unknown stakeholders, you now know them. Or at least you've gone some of the way to knowing them. Like you might not know everyone, but it's a start, right? And you know, what's that thing? Perfection is the enemy of. Thank you. Good. So you even got that wrong. So like just starting the sentence, someone finished it for me, is better than not starting it. But yeah, just having that has meant now we've got like a bit of a plan. And what we're doing is like the findings that come from this, we're turning that into like a readout. So like that's an email that we then send out to the managers based on like, here's what we found in that, and here's what's going next. So I think, yeah, last slide, key takeaways, which is timing on that, by the way. Yeah, stakeholders like absolutely everywhere. The more you can communicate, the better. The more you drive the narrative, the more you build those relationships. Like always try and be on the front foot with it. And if you think you're not communicating enough, like do more. If you think you're communicating loads, do more. Like the more transparent you can be, the easier you'll find things. And this is like most important to me. Like good communication brings your team together. Like if your team aren't like wedded to what you're trying to achieve, it's really difficult to like get people to be motivated and do stuff if they don't know what they're all trying to do each day. And likewise, like those people won't be advocates for whatever you're trying to do if they don't quite get it themselves. Be the person telling the plan. Again, even if it's really early on, there's tools and techniques. Like I've listed a few, but like Mind the Product's website is like free now. So if you've got a thing coming up like, oh, I need to do prioritization, just go on their website, put in prioritization. It comes up with like a load of frameworks. Like just give it a go. Like I used to think like, oh, this framework, you must have to have like 2 years degree in how to work it. It's like, it's not. Like you saw before, that was just a grid. like everyone can do it. Just like try things. Don't be afraid to like have a go. And yeah, lastly, having some kind of like process around who your stakeholders are, theming them, and coming up with a plan to talk to them. I found it's really helped me. I hope that is helpful for other people. And yeah, any questions on any of that at all? Yeah.
Same understanding and what would be your advice in that?
Think I would be trying to understand. So just let me make sure I'm understanding correctly. Are you wanting to talk to them and tell them stuff, but they're not interested in finding out? Yeah. And what is the nature of the relationship? Are you working? Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I'd be like I'd be keen to understand like why in the situation. I'd be trying to understand like what do you want to see that you're not seeing right now? Because we've got what we consider like a load of good data, and here's what you could be doing with it, but it's obviously not serving your needs because you're not using it. So be really blunt, ask them the question like, what can we do to get you to a place where you're comfortable making decisions based on what we're giving to you? And try and also understand like what exactly they're trying to achieve. Because maybe like that thing was showing like when I had like 10-page documents that I was emailing to people and people didn't care. Maybe it could be like the way you're presenting it doesn't meet the needs that they have in terms of receiving information. Maybe like you've got a big email and really you could record like a 30-second video. Like, I'm making stuff up, but like try and find out like how they want to receive information. Hi. Thank you. Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think like every situation's different and nuanced, right? So like what might work in my organization or an organization I used to be in might not be the same there. So what I'd say is like just go off your gut. I know that's not really helpful, but go off your gut about like, right, with these people in this top block, how do I think they want to be communicated with? What have I seen in the organization already? What ask them like, how do you want me to communicate this information to you? And do the same for like your 4 different blocks, but also like, don't be scared to like mix it up. Like consider like whatever you start with as like an MVP. If you're trying it, if you're sending out Slack messages and you're hearing nothing back, we'll just be like, okay, that's not working. What next? So like it doesn't have to be decide and that's it. Like it can evolve and you can like iterate and improve even with your communication. Any other questions? Hmm.
Setting goals going into meetings with stakeholders. How do you avoid kind of getting the answers that you want versus what's actually they need?
I suppose like quite often like it's not that I want certain answers. I just need to know an answer. Like if it's bad news, that's okay. But what is difficult is if you don't have all the right information. So if like, for example, I don't know, you wanted them to give you a go ahead to do X, Y, and Z. If you go in there and they say no, at least you've got a decision and you can like change and pivot stuff based on that. But yeah, it's getting to that point where you can actually, I need to know this information. It might not be like, sometimes it might be I want to influence people to do some things differently, but sometimes it's just like I need to know their opinion on stuff, if that's helpful. Anyone else? Cool. Okay. Well, thank you. Last slide. Thanks, everyone. If anyone wants to check out the podcast, it'd be really, really great to hear more from people. Evie's speaking next, I believe, and then Dan's after that. So you've got through the awkward opening support act, and you've got like some really good speakers to look forward to now. So enjoy the rest of the evening, and thanks, Colin, for inviting me.
Keep this up for now. We'll have a quick break for people to go to the bathroom, get some more drinks, and while they get some pizza. So, want to take, was it 10 minutes? and then Evie will be up, and I'll leave this up here so that anyone wants to scan this can scan it. So thanks again, Michael. Cheers. Right, so our next speaker is going to be Evie. I'm absolutely delighted to get Evie. Actually, I know it's probably like a lot of you, if you've seen Evie, she's sort of big on LinkedIn famous, and that's where I saw her first. I sort of saw her articles, added her, we met for a coffee. I knew I wanted her to speak straight away from all of the content that she put out there. We discussed this topic, didn't we, over coffee?
Yeah, a couple months ago now. Before,
but it felt very pertinent based on a lot of the feedback that I was getting from the industry as a recruiter. I'm seeing a hell of a lot more CVs from people in product at the moment. So I'm absolutely delighted to get Evie speaking. Without further ado, here she is.
Oh, thanks, guys. So yeah, as Colin mentioned at the start, this talk was originally called How Product Can Prove Their Value to the C-Suite. And since we caught up a couple of months ago to decide that this would be a really relevant topic, there's been even more change about what people think about products at the moment. So we're going to cover all of that. We're going to cover where the market's up to at the moment, and then we'll talk about what people can really do to start trying to prove their value in product and what value in product even looks like at the moment. So I'll get started. Oh, a bit about me and why you should listen to me apart from Colin's amazing introduction. I'm now a product consultant and coach. So I previously worked at Booking.com, which is why I was based in Manchester. And then I left there about 2 years ago. And since then, I've been working with a whole host of different businesses, and I've been helping them to make their whole organization really, really good at product. So I sit in this great position now where I get to see different trends in the market, and I get to observe how product teams are acting and performing and what's making them good and where they're not doing so well, which means I have a bunch of insights which are hopefully useful to share with you. And then I've just been chatting to some people about this. But I also have been traveling the world for the last 2 years and doing that as a digital nomad. So I'm like, that's why I have a tan and I can't iron anymore. But yeah, can't complain about life. Drama. So I'm sure a bunch of you remember, you might have entered product at this time, or you might have already been in product. But during like 2019, 2020, we hit this kind of golden era where everyone wanted product managers. And salaries were going through the roof, and everyone was recruiting, and you had the opportunity to choose whichever companies you wanted to work at. And it was great. We were all like, oh God, like we found this career that we love, and people want to pay us loads to do this. Like, this is fantastic. And Manchester went through a boom, and like so did the whole world. And it was like, oh, like what could go wrong? We're in this career for life now. And it makes sense, like, especially during COVID, everyone was at home and they had money to spend online. So people needed to recruit for more people because no one was doing anything in person anymore. And then we get to 2023, and this is what all of the headlines now look like. Big tech layoffs. These are some stats that Colin posted the other day about the amount of product roles that are being recruited for in the Northwest. And engineering roles have also gone down, but not to the same extent as the supporting functions. So people still know that we need software, and people still want to develop these things, but not to the same extent as they did before. And then, oh, we'll see if this works. You might need to press play. And then this is the latest. This is Brian from Airbnb, who've been talking about their changes to product management.
Much smaller. We elevated design. By the way, I started thinking to myself, who's the product manager when you design a building? The architect. So thought of designers very much as architects. And we started doing these release cycles where we'll ship 80% of products twice a year during these releases. And then to be clear, we do optimizations. We do ship code every single hour of every single day. But that's a budget. That's about 20%. And this is how we started running the company. And I started reviewing all the work. I reviewed the work every week, every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks. Before, people thought that was meddling. And I said, you know what? Screw it. Like, we're going to review everything.
That's the highlights. Let me see if this will move on. Here we go. Still talking. There we go, we're fine. So if anyone hasn't actually seen that video and they've potentially just seen the post that went out that was like, Airbnb's gotten rid of product, it's not as extreme as that, but clearly the way that they're doing product now has changed. They're combining two different functions, and as opposed to trying to ship code all of the time, which is what we all got told we should do in product, they're doing 2 big releases a year. And instead of making everything fully autonomous, they're also bringing decisions back up so leadership are involved. So the ways that we've all been told for the last however many years, so we should be doing product properly, people are starting to do it slightly differently. And that doesn't mean that everything's changing, but it does mean that there might be some shifts that people start to see. So overall, what does this really mean? We shifted from digital growth in the pandemic to tighter budgets now. Makes sense. That's economic conditions, so it makes sense that markets go down. Shareholders and founders, though, in those kind of scenarios, usually shift to a place where they're operating in scarcity mode. So instead of empowering people to make their own decisions and saying, "Hey, you've got loads of time, go figure out what customers want and build these things that are great," people start to go more into a mode of, "Well, I'd rather tell you what to do because then I feel like I'm in control," which kind of takes away the need for product because that's what we spend a lot of our time doing. So the important thing now is that product really needs to identify where they can add value and make sure that you're doing that in the right way. And then this was the latest. This came up yesterday, which is why I ended up changing the title of the talk, because there's this article that's like, "The death of product managers spreads," which is total clickbait, but whatever. This stuff's obviously going around the internet. And then this fella who works in Silicon Valley was, I don't know if you can read all of this, but he put out this LinkedIn post, which is basically like, in 25 years experience at Silicon Valley, I can't remember a single time that a product manager's actually added any value. And I'm like, oh, that cuts deep. Like, I've been working in product management for 9 years and people are starting to say that my role is worthless and I don't achieve anything. But then he goes on to talk about the fact that product managers are a blocker to delivery. We sit as middlemen and we get in the way, and people should just speak to engineering, etc., which I don't disagree with, because I don't think that's where product functions the best or adds the most value. And this is why, like, we're now hitting this new era of product management. So if we go back and think about why product owners existed in the first place, it's because people started implementing Agile. They started picking up the Agile handbook, which said you need a team of this size and you need a Scrum Master and a product owner, and the product owner is there to refine the backlog and make sure we've got clear priorities and they work within the team. And then obviously things shifted and we started to have more product managers who were more focused on strategy and less focused on stuff within the team. And now we've got teams and a lot of businesses that have adopted Agile and they've done it well. So the more advanced companies are now at a point where you don't even need a product person in the team necessarily, because engineers can run themselves. I was fortunate enough when I worked at, well, I say fortunate, when I worked at Booking.com, I was in a position where I was running multiple different teams and we had different missions to achieve, and I had 2 product teams of developers that I worked with directly, and I didn't have time to do all of those things. So I had to take a step back and empower them to set their own goals, to be able to pick things from the top of the priority list, to be able to write their own user stories, to be able to make their own scope decisions if things were or weren't going to plan. And there are more and more organizations now that are starting to operate that way, where you don't necessarily need to be in the team and working in the team day in and day out. That's not always the case, but it means that you can start to carve out more time if you can get people to operate that way, because they know how to deliver well, to do other things, which is where product actually can and should add value. So for example, product now is more about doing that to add the extra value. It's more about finding out what those opportunities are and building the right thing to achieve that. And I'm sure everyone's seen this kind of model before, where you look at feasibility, viability, and desirability, and product's best place to sit in the middle of all of that. Yes, we've typically spent more time in the top part of feasibility, where we've worked within the teams and we've known a bit about what the business is trying to achieve, and we've spoken to customers when we get time. But really where we're moving to now is that we don't need to spend as much time in that top space, and we can start to hopefully spend time in more of the bottom 2 spaces, which means that we really can add value because we can identify what that sweet spot is by speaking to customers, by understanding the business strategy and the goals. And this is a little diagram of everything, and there's probably more things that exist than this, of everything that happens in product. We don't just do delivery. That's one tiny piece of the whole product puzzle. We do everything from what our product culture is, what's the mindset and the values that we adopt in our team, We think about where we're going, what's our vision, what's our North Star metric, what problems are we trying to solve, what hypotheses do we have? And then we get to the point where we deliver things and we test and learn and we iterate. And along the bottom, we're always doing continuous discovery. We're communicating with stakeholders, as Michael beautifully spoke about. And we're communicating up and down the hierarchy where we're telling people, hey, you wanted to achieve this business goal, but actually we learned this thing, so therefore maybe we should change that. So there's so much that product does and can do. And the more time we spend just in that delivery slice, the less time we have to do all of these other things, which can make it seem like we're not adding the value that we know we're capable of because we can work in all these other areas. And then this is a bit more of a summary of what Airbnb has done. So they've combined the product management function, the product marketing function. And you can see here there's some overlap between what these two roles were doing anyway. But previously in this product management space, what people have defined as being a product management role is to do things like backlog prioritization, release plans, roadmaps. And that's kind of, in my eyes, glorified admin. It's like a great thing that product people can do, but is that really where we're having the most impact versus thinking about the whole picture? So I'm not saying that everyone should move to the Airbnb model, but there's more that can be done here to say, well, what's actually going to add value? What's going to create profit? Let's not just do things. Let's think about what we're doing and what impact that's going to have overall, and make sure it can be marketed and make sure we can find the right audience that wants these things. And that doesn't mean that people have to pick up both spaces, but it potentially means having more conversations with the people that operate across that whole spectrum. And product really does add value. So if we're allowed the time to do all of those things properly, there's a bunch of stats here if anyone needs to go around and like shout and say, please keep me employed, or like hire me for a new job. This is why it's important. But there's key things that product do. We add profit to an organization. We make the customer experience better, so there's higher customer retention rates. And this last stat is around road mapping decisions and ROI realization. So we're far better placed to make better decisions and make sure we're uncovering things that add value than we would be without product. So how do you actually prove product value? These are the kind of spaces that people need to start operating in and shouting about a bit more to make sure that they're seen as being valuable in a company. So doing more things like trying to understand the whole market as opposed to just focusing on customer problems. And that doesn't mean that products should actually necessarily do the market research themselves, but having an understanding as to where growth opportunities are, if there's a new geography that you should enter, if there's a new audience that you should target, the more information you have about those kind of things, the more you can define what your product and your product strategy should look like. And to be able to do that and have those conversations, you need to delegate more of the day-to-day to engineering. And then the second part, understanding what your customers really want. I think everyone's dabbled, and some people are better at spending more time in this space than others. Everyone knows that you should be doing customer research and gaining insight and using that to your advantage, but we don't always carve out the time to do so. And the same with measuring value. It's not just a case of shipping something, it's a case of experimenting, learning, and getting valuable insights. And with those two things, this is what Michael was talking about earlier as well. It's not just a case of saying, hey, done this, tick the box, I've got this insight. It's sharing that in a meaningful way that people do want to read it, that you're saying, hey, we've got this insights, this is the impact it has on the decisions we're going to make next, or this part of the business, and making sure you speak to the right stakeholders and get that message across so people can really see what you are doing and what you're working on. And they're areas that people that are in product can actually start doing now. You can start spending more time on those areas and focusing on them. And then point 4 and 5 are areas that we're not always fully in control of as product people on the ground, but we can start to influence people higher up in the organization to say, hey, if you want us to add more impact and more value, we need to be getting these things right. So having a product strategy that identifies what those real opportunities are, and having cross-functional working, so no longer just sitting with a cross-functional team, but of like UX, research, developers, product owners, but actually combining customer success, sales, marketing, and making sure that you're looking at that holistic picture. And if you can do those two things right together, if your organization can identify, here's the real value adding opportunities, and we want to center a whole group of people to work around achieving this opportunity, you reduce the silos and you can really add the impact as opposed to fighting with each other about results. And And how do you actually then prove the value? Going back to the first part that we said we talk about, you need to be in the conversations. So if as product people, you're not in the conversations and you don't know what the business is trying to achieve, you're not going to be able to add any value because you don't know where that value lies. You don't know what's important to stakeholder X or Y. So having those chats with those stakeholders and being like, hey, my outcome is that I want to know what's actually important to you, means you can add impact in the areas that they care about. Highlighting all of the amazing insights that you've uncovered. So again, we're really good at just like sending out a note like, hey, we found out this thing from our experiment that no one reads. I won't talk too much about this because this is what the first talk highlighted really well, but making that impactful and sharing it in a way that people actually want to pay attention to it highlights the value that you're adding in different spaces. And number 3, influencing the business to be set up in a certain way. So if the organisation isn't already doing a lot of these things that I spoke about, I'm not saying you should tackle them all at once because our jobs are already overwhelming as they are, but what things can you start to shape conversations around to say, hey, like, why don't we think about getting a clearer product strategy? Or why don't we think about working closer with this function to add the value that we want to add? And that's everything. So top takeaways, product management is not dead. We're just evolving into a new era. And not everyone's moving on that same journey at the same time. Some organizations are more advanced than others, but it's a space that will start to shape and shift and change over time. Then the second part, so that new era means that product managers should step away from focusing so much in the delivery and really focusing more on these areas where they can understand what the most valuable problems are to solve and how to solve them the best through that customer insight and that market understanding. And then finally, I think everyone knows this, no one else really makes change. I think product people try and drive change in organizations more than anyone else because we're never static and stable and happy with the way things are. So we're best placed to be the ones that are at the forefront of trying to drive this change and make sure that we can work in a way where we can really add value. And that's everything. Again, I know we spoke about the podcast before, but when I was going through these slides, I was like, oh, I could talk way more about product discovery, and I could talk way more about like how to make sure you choose which areas to influence. And they're both topics that we've recently covered on the podcast. So not one to toot our own horn, but if you want to know any more about those areas, then it should hopefully be a good listen. Yeah, any questions? Thanks. Thank Canva.
You say basically project like around between I had some things that are basically for probably even for data analysts.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, liaising with stakeholders, which probably is sharing some of the responsibilities.
It completely depends on the organisation. So some organisations have all of those functions and some don't. And I think where you have all of those functions, then as a product person, you're kind of in a luxury position to say, well, how can I influence this person to pick up these parts and I want to focus in this space? It doesn't have to be an exact science. But I do think when we have more and more roles, we get to the point where teams become so bloated that there's more communication going on than there is actually the doing of the work. So it's about trying to find that balance and making sure that everyone's super clear on what their role is in that space and why. Yeah.
Sort of delivery and products maybe merging as a role over the next few years. You sort of talk about more businesses are mature. Do you think that one of the roles is going to suffer, or one's going to have to adapt into the other?
Again, like it completely depends on the organisation. So there's a lot of organisations that still exist that are very not necessarily focused on outcomes. They have a project that they need to deliver, and therefore delivery is kind of more important. and product's an element of saying, well, let's make sure we're doing this so it is correct for the customer. And then you have other organizations that are a lot more outcome focused, that therefore product becomes more important. So I think there will be detraction from both, but it will depend on how the organizations change on a whole.
How do you do that in your own mind?
Yeah. And it's like, so I think there's a whole part of the organization where that is the way it is, and you're stepping into a team that expects you to work a certain way. And I always recommend to people that you go in and observe all of that for a month or so before you start to try and drive any change. But it's also about, like, when you're interviewing for places, some people love operating in that delivery function. So find organizations where you can do that if that's what you want to do. But if you want to be more focused on strategy and insight and customer understanding, then try and ask those questions and understand if you're moving into an organization that supports that and allows for that, and might have an engineering culture that's happy to pick up more of the delivery work. So yeah, I think it's partially your own understanding of your strengths and where you want to operate, and then it's working out how to influence people to get the right things done. And you can influence, I always say you can influence so far, but there's a certain element of culture that, like, you can't change. So you need to identify where those boundaries are and what you can do. Does that help?
Yeah.
Sorry, there was another question at the back as well, and then I'll take yours. Okay. Yeah. And do you know what? Sometimes that's not a problem. Like, sometimes these people do know because they came in with a vision, they've got a vision for their own company, and they already know that market and they know what's going to work. So at the early stages, it's quite helpful. But then as you want to grow and evolve, these people have to start to learn where they can add impact and where they need to delegate. So some of the coaching is around that, like, do you really think you should be making these decisions, or do you think you can free up your time to work elsewhere? And then a lot of it is in that whole testing and learning space. So if people have these ideas, which is where a lot of people start from, and they're launching them, is it having the impact that they expected? And you need to identify what impact they're trying to deliver from that first. And then they start to learn themselves as to whether their own ideas are working or not, or if they think there's a gap there and they need to get someone else in to help think about it in a different way. So they're the main bits that I touch on with people, but there might be more as well.
Example, like a customer requested fixing like a UX problem. We ask your salesperson saying we need this feature to make more sales, and how would you go about communicating?
Amazing. Okay, first one. I know I might have to ask you again afterwards, it's fine. So the first question is kind of the easier one to answer because there's a bunch of good frameworks out there. And for me, it depends on how complex the thing is you're looking at. If it's like small features that you're trying to compare against each other, then using the RICE framework, like reach, impact, and not even going to that extent, just doing impact versus effort, you can usually quite clearly pick out the top 5 things you're going to do. And I'm always like, don't look beyond that, because so much changes over the next course of time. People prioritize a backlog of like 20 things that they never get around to. So, and it's usually quite obvious to pick your top 5. And if you're fighting over 2 within that top 5, like, don't waste your time on it. You'll deliver them all eventually. But if you're looking at a bigger piece of work, then you need to use different prioritization features, which kind of leads on to your second question about like, oh, I've got this request from this function and this function. And I've got loads of thoughts on that, because one of my thoughts is one of the bits I said at the end is like, we shouldn't necessarily be operating in that way where we're all different anymore anyway. But if we still are, and again, like, hopefully everyone has a product strategy, but if you don't, like, it's even more difficult. But at an overall level, if you've got these different requests coming in, it's not necessarily trying to say like, is this going to make more money, or do we care about this? If you've already got your strategy, you know whether you're trying to drive revenue, or if you're trying to retain customers, or if you're trying to like leverage a different technique, which already helps you identify which one of those routes you might want to go down. So you can quickly say like, yes, let's go down this route, or no, let's go down this route. And then even if people come up with ideas, it's not a case of saying, great idea. It's like, okay, what problem are you trying to solve? Does this really lead into what we're trying to achieve as a product function overall? And if not, again, don't worry about it. You focus on what you're trying to focus on and things that are going to help you achieve that goal, which only helps if you have all of those foundations in place. So I'm always like, this is the way to do product perfectly, which I know a lot of organizations don't have. So it's uncovering the gaps that you're missing and how to answer the questions in those spaces. Does that help? Cool. We can chat afterwards as well if you've got more. Sweet.
Right. Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
So I'll keep this introduction brief. Dan had a good intro from Michael earlier here for the authority locally on design systems. So
I mean, you can't really respond to that, can you? It's lovely that people say nice things, but that's ridiculous. So I've shortened the title down to that because it kind of makes sense with the thing. So I'm Dan. I'm now a design system consultant, and as part of that, I'm now product owner for the design system at 𝘗𝘴𝘶, which is in its really early days, or early days of the 4th iteration. So before that, I was at 𝘂𝘂𝘰𝘥𝘶, which is a design system documentation product. Before that, AutoTrader, where we had some pains getting a design system going, and I ended up getting into product that way. And so if you think about design systems, there's all these things which disappear off your screen really unhelpfully. It should animate, but imagine it's moving and there's lots of them. That'd be great. So almost everywhere publishes their public design systems, and people go, oh, that's really nice and shiny. And they all contain basically the same thing, which is Lego. So when people talk about design systems, they kind of think about these are ways of expressing brand and components, all these kind of reusable things. Anyone actually work with a design system? Do you have, this is brilliant. This is the kind of audience I want. Steve, your hand could have been higher, but I'll let you go. So a quote that sums it up for me would be this. When people sometimes talk about a design system, they might be talking about a UI kit in Figma. They might be talking about coded components, all kinds of things. But really, those are just the artifacts. They're just bits of the puzzle. What makes it a system is all of the processes and the people stuff you put around it. So that summed it up really nicely. And that's back in 2019. So this is not new ground. People have been doing some kind of reusability, some kind of componentization for a long time. And one thing that made it make sense to me was realizing that this isn't chunks of UI or UX work. These are solutions to problems that we've already come across. So why would you do it again? But we do. We just endlessly make the same shit over and over again. And when I break it down even further, because I love being overly reductionist, all these things are people, objects, and relationships. We've got a bunch of people doing talented things, research, UX, design, whatever it might be, and we make these beautiful artifacts for people to use. And it's because of all these relationships that we make anything good. And those relationships are the things that matter. So typically, when you hear about design systems at all, people say, oh, we want to be more consistent. We want to be faster. And that's somewhat true. Those are the easy answers. Really, it's so much deeper than that because most organizations aren't ready for them. They're not ready for the impact it's going to have. And so what I'm trying to go into really quickly through lots of slides with just words on in pink is the fact that if you put all of the artifacts, the design code to one side, it's fundamentally a people challenge that we've got, an organizational structure challenge. So if you go back to the problem space, no one starts here, ever, in design systems. They go, we need one, it will make us faster. It might. But what are your problems in your particular organization? Why do you think this is going to help you? And skipping that first step is often a massive fail, because then it becomes a thing that designers feel is a good idea, or developers saying, yeah, we should use components. it doesn't feel joined up because we've not done the homework. We've not started at the very basic premise of this shiny thing that everyone else is doing. That's great, but why should we do it? What is the point? If you skip straight to the artifacts, you've missed all of that. It becomes a bit of a designer ego stroking thing of, great, we've got these reusable shiny components. We can do things better and faster. This doesn't work. The problem we've got then is, if we don't know the problem, we also don't know what success looks like. So we've bypassed all of this and gone, we want shiny things. And the problem with that in design systems is you don't get numbers that are reliable or even interesting. How do you measure consistency? It's quite an abstract thing, which is more of a design eye. You might be able to bring it down to, this is a bit off. You're still talking in quite abstract terms. How are you more efficient? If you're not already measuring efficiency, how are you going to know you're more efficient? And if it gets so confusing. So largely metrics from design systems are bullshit. You'll notice the word bullshit cropping up a lot in this talk, by the way. Going back to what you were talking about before as well, the value is the key thing. If you're going with the easy answers and saying this will be faster and more consistent, that's what everyone says. That's not even interesting. What's the value for you? Is it that you get to finally acknowledge that you're not as collaborative as you want to be? Is it that you get designers and developers talking the same language? These things are profound, really. And it's nothing to do with having a shiny system of some kind. That's a value you can't easily measure either. It's really difficult territory. So the more I look into it, and the more I got excited by it, the truth is the artifacts are the last thing. If you do the groundwork, you do the people bit, the structural stuff, whether it's design or code, that becomes easy. Because assuming you've got talented people around you, which we should all do, that's the easy bit. That's what they're paid to do. So fundamentally, all of this stuff, when we talk about designing systems, is a people challenge. What a surprise, because literally everything is. So it's great to saying you should all do this stuff, but it's not easy. And part of that is the people structure bit, the exploring the problem space. If you don't do your homework, understand the problem, we don't get to ask some of these kinds of questions. How is it even going to work? If it's purely a design thing, it might make your designers a bit happier. That might be worth it. But if we don't understand how do things work today, is one question you could ask, like literally across the organization. It's starting to look broader than your particular team. You're starting to push outside of your assumptions. How do they actually work today? Does every team work the same? Because what you've now got is a design system which works for all of these other teams. They're your customers. So if you don't know how they work, how are you supposed to know your design system is going to help them? So doing your homework, part of the problem space, understanding value and how things actually work on the ground is a huge step that, trust me, loads of people miss. They dive straight into making the thing. And when we start talking about stakeholders as well, they're not even just the people consuming it or hire senior people who like Lego. It might be people that are far removed and not directly affected. It might be platform engineers. It might be people quite a long way away, which should be part of the conversation. Because it's not even as linear as saying who is going to consume from the system, but who might need to know. Okay, so we've done a bit of research and we think we need a thing. We need one of these shiny things. The people bit, again, is really, really difficult. So if we understand the way that people work, this is part of what we need to achieve. We're not going to change processes. We're not going to revolutionize the entire organization because we're making some shiny components. That's misguided. What we can do is say, these are how teams work today. How can we improve it? That's our job. As part of that, design systems themselves have underlying people, structures, and models we can use. So very often, if you hear about design system team, it's centralized. You've got a bunch of people here making the system. There's product people, there's developers, designers, and then each of these product teams or feature teams being supplied by that centralized team. And there's variety in that too. Maybe that team's making all the components, maybe then just shepherding the process. That can have variety. You could say we don't have resource for a centralized team. And so what you've got is a loose collection of people across all of the other teams saying, we form a collective. We are the design systems people. We will shepherd this thing into being and make joined up decisions. That kind of cuts across all of your product teams in a really odd, probably uncomfortable way. Each one of these people is already allocated to deliver work. How are they doing this as well? So that becomes a challenge for the structure of an organization already, and we've not made anything. What you tend to find over time, especially in bigger organizations, is there's a bit of a hybrid. So you maybe have limited resource in the middle, but you've got people in each of the feature teams which help make it better. It can't be either or, really. So that hybrid model means you get the benefit of people on the ground doing the work for the end user, but being considered part of that collective, which makes design decisions together. So the benefits should be clear, but maybe they're not. Our job in a design system team is to empower everyone else, not stroke our own egos and have the best components. And so we can gauge success by loose metrics, probably qualitative stuff, to be honest, by saying, have we helped you to do your job better? That's fundamentally the question that we need to evaluate ourselves by. Much like I think people a while ago discovered, data was a massive thing for an organization. I had to, sorry, I have to stop. This really pisses me off. I used to work at a company that was based in America, so we had to use American spelling. I need to change all my settings back to English. Anyway, it should become an asset in the way that it's almost infrastructure. It's not just a product in its own right. It should be something that everyone relies upon. And again, when you go back to those conceits of maybe it makes us faster or higher quality or whatever, higher up they're thinking, great, we can ship more. We can just get more stuff out. That is, again, bullshit. Because ideally what you want is to say, well, actually, we know we can deliver. This tool, this set of components helps us deliver quality faster. Ideally, that means we get more time to test, to do research, and do the right thing, because we're quite comfortable with execution. Getting a bit het up. And so thinking about workflows as well. If I oversimplify again, because that's a hobby of mine, and just say, all right, in a really linear sense, we have a sense of a simplified product workflow. How does the design system fit in? And so if we're going, at what point should they go, maybe we've done this before. Maybe we should somehow look at previous solutions. And you can start lo-fi, and I'm really a big fan of Mural, Miro, FigJam, all these things. Slap some post-its around. Does that make any sense? Because again, if we're not empowering people to do work, we're slowing them down, we're making things worse. So if with post-its, you can go, oh, I don't know about that. So if a designer should go, before I do anything, I should check the design system. If I have a thing, great. If not, then what do I do? Before you've made anything, you can start working out, how do we make sense of this? And then the other thing, if you go, well, we love this design system, it's brilliant, but that component we used was just crap. It broke everything. It's kind of your fault, design system people. So before we do any real work, there's some kind of an issue, and we need to, there's a whole workflow here we can imagine. Again, oversimplify. Who's going to do that? If there is some kind of problem, you don't want to hold up that delivery of the stuff the product team is doing. How do we help them? So you stick this all together, and the design system team's got their own thing of going, yeah, we need to do our own discovery and stuff. But then someone suggested a new thing we should put in there, and they need it. So to give you an idea of the volume of people, or at least job functions that you need, we've just thrown some post-its around and gone, holy shit, this is actually a lot of work. Lots of people skip all of this. And trust me, I've spoken to a lot of them. What's really interesting as well, and gives you a lot of ideas for the future, is do these teams actually today acknowledge the product design or tech debt they actually have. Do they do anything about it? Or do they keep kicking that can down the road? Because that relationship tells you a lot about how this is going to play out. So before we've even made anything, we've gone, oh, man, this is confusing. There's structures, there's people. There's already a lot we could do to make things better. But because this isn't necessarily a product team, we've got this weird notion of how do we create community around a thing internally, especially in larger companies. Maybe you're remote, maybe the dev team's remote, maybe you're just spread all over the world. This is hard at the best of times. But how do you do it when the people you work with are in lots of different product teams all over the place? Our job as part of design systems is then going, oh, do you know what this is? How can we help you? We should educate you as we go how to use this, how to get the most from it. And we want to learn about you. That takes time. Who's going to do that? Again, it's kind of a product space within a design system team. And not every design system team, no matter how mature, recognizing that product has a place in it. But you can tell before we've even made any design artifacts or written any code, there is a lot to go at. And then these feedback loops. So we want to listen, actively listen. Are we helping you to do your work? Are we helping you to deliver faster, better quality, whatever it might be? That whole value thing. Are we doing that? I think when we talk about like product owner, and these words have meaning, for me, owning it is largely another bullshit term with design systems. It's not yours. You don't own it and make it better for your own self. It's for all of these other product teams. And so it's letting go a little bit and trying to make some compromises which aren't particularly comfortable. So in many ways, it's trying to massage all of these things into shape. So a good example might be you have a well-used component. Maybe it's a form. Maybe it's part of a user journey, which everybody uses. Another team goes, we should use that, but they have new requirements. What do? Do you change that component so now there's 3 things, 4 things? Do you say it's now a different thing? It's trying to massage these into shape. And through all this education stuff, it's trying to, again, through that storytelling aspect, be really clear on why are we doing this? How can we help you? How can we make everything better? And keep taking people on the journey. So as part of the product function, it's that education and outreach constantly. Always. Not just, oh, we should check in, but it's almost making sure that you miss nobody. Everyone should be familiar with what this is, how to use it, and how it's going to help. So you've got some form of collective, a centralized team, loads of designers and developers. This is really hard. Get anyone to agree on anything. Well done. Gold star all around, I think. But this, when you come to making design decisions that have a ripple effect through an organization, it's incredibly difficult. How do you get people to agree? So some of that folds into a governance process. And again, before you've even designed anything, before you've coded anything, how do we make decisions? How are we going to do this? How are we going to form consensus? These are loose questions that you're not going to get answers to easily, but you can start off by saying, there is a thing such as governance. How do we look after this? How do we make good choices? Which relates to strategy, which goes back to value. Why are we having a design system here? What's the point? What's the end game? The stakeholder thing, again, because it's not just your customers, the people consuming from the design system, but who might have some value? Maybe they're tangential. So it goes right back to what Simon, I've got the name Simon on my brain, I meant Michael, right at the beginning. Really doing your homework around stakeholders. So before we've made anything, we've established this is what we're really doing. It's quite profound internal change for lots of people. And so my previous role, speaking to a lot of enterprise clients, you could tell on the call that people didn't know each other. So I'd get someone in saying, we want some advocate time to help us with adoption. No one's using our design system. And sometimes you can just tell. You dial into a call and you go, you've just not spent any time together, have you? Can I recommend you go fishing? You know, what is it people do to bond? You skip that and somehow expected this thing to fix your existing problems. Maybe go for a beer. Because again, if you don't do the legwork with people and getting to know each other and what drives you, how are you going to do this other stuff? A design system cuts right across all of your teams, everything that you do. Oh, I just said that. Again, the conflict that we've got is this, where lots of people want to see the short-term gain. And so you're going to get some of that, but it's really hard to justify the investment for longer term when they don't understand what it is you're doing. You don't have the same metrics as another product where you can say, we did this for our external users, it went up by some percentage points, and we can measure that. This is difficult. And largely the metrics you get, like I said at the beginning, are bullshit. How do you persuade people to invest in a system that should become a business critical function when they don't get it? We can allow ourselves to collaborate in ways we'd always wanted to, but the silos went up accidentally. And now we're not talking to those other people in the way that we wanted to. We can spend more time in the problem space solving the right problem and executing well because we know we can do this. That is a real challenge for people. You don't have to just settle for releasing MVPs. An MVP shouldn't be, we've done it and move on to the next. But so often it is. And so by taking the worry about how do we release the thing, how long is it going to take, we've got all of this process stuff. When you reduce that, maybe the design system gives you half of it by saying we've got some of these components, but not everything. Instead of how do we do all of this, maybe it's half. Maybe it's even 80% you've already got. So when you take that away, you should be able to focus on solving problems. And for all of these disciplines, that's what we're here for. So that means as a designer, you're not someone that is just there to push pixels. You are a problem solver. As a developer, you're not there to make a button for the millionth time. You've done that before. Don't do it again. So if you're not there making the same shit over and over again, what is the point of you? Solving problems. I should really look at the next slide to pro move. So I've ranted a lot because that's what I do, because I'm really passionate about this stuff. So design systems being a collection of components, design decisions that we've made should be really, really powerful when done right. They're not a conceit of just a few excitable designers or developers going, maybe we can do things better. They're a lever you can pull to change things internally. So that means that if you have quite siloed teams, this is going to be painful. Whether you have a centralized team or not, how do you break those silos and get people talking and collaborating? That's genuinely hard, and people suck at this. And the temptation is if a designer or a developer sees a big shiny system like we saw at the beginning, they'll go, we want one of those. You never see the story behind it. Every single time I heard a story from some of our clients, it started off going, I've heard this one before. Big enterprise, yeah. Offshore dev team, yeah. Every time there was a twist in the tail. And these are just design decisions like what colors to use, what components to use. That's the truth. So if you get rid of the bullshit, we solve problems better together. And that means structurally too. We're not making lots of different stuff. Oversimplify it. We're just making websites or apps. It's not rocket science. It's really not as difficult as loads of people's jobs. But if we do it collaboratively and together, using this as a way of doing that, we can have some real change, which isn't about pixels or components. I'm done ranting. Any questions? Did you like the pink?
be around improving the people.
That's the challenge. Because when you've got this loose model, the instance that you'll have per organization will be really, really different. And so some of it would be, I've spoken to people where they just cannot free up that time. So yeah, you and that product team, you're part of this design system thing, but you have to do it side of desk. There's all different ways it can play out, but it goes back to governance and that consensus and forming decisions. That's the thing that matters. How it shakes down, who's got what time, that's hard. It's not going to answer your question at all, but I think I sidestepped it nicely. Hey, hand at the back. The main example would be being told not to make a design system and doing it anyway. With a particular, this minute, very, very, in the past, corporate enough, I suppose. But when, especially senior leadership don't get the whole Lego model thing and you can't break through that, you try to be upfront. The only strategy I found to work was don't talk about it and do it anyway, and just show the output from it. And so people care about output, not necessarily the way that you got there. And so a design system doesn't have to be a complete, finished, decided thing. If anything, it should be really ragged and adaptable. And that's what people forget when you see the shiny finished thing, is the fact that it tells you nothing about the workflow. It tells you nothing about the pain that got them there. So if you have trouble with buy-in or anyone understanding or any of that, all I can say is it worked for me to just show the shiny and then do it anyway. And I think that doing it anyway can mean lots of things. You don't have to have the big finished design system. Pick the important bit. Is it the communication? Is it about governance? That's just writing some stuff down. Is it about ways of working? Again, that's not about anyone doing anything differently as such or creating loads of overhead. If it's about creating components or something, they probably want to do that anyway. Start with some simple things. Like the most complicated component you've got. Like Dan Moore did a great talk on it. If you get the most gnarly component you've got and that everyone uses, start with that in your design system. Once they're using it, you can break it down behind the scenes and change it. And then, unbeknownst to them, they're using a design system and you trick them. I have no idea if that helps you. Yes. Well done with the hand up. In what way?
So
I think it's both. So you need to have some general principles to work to, but you need it to be adaptable enough to realize that, and also stay humble. Like your best effort you need to have something. You can't start with nothing and then only listen to them. Otherwise, you've got lots of conflicting needs, and that's difficult. So you have to put a solid step forward and be prepared to be adaptable, I think. So some of it is working out how far do you go to meet their needs at the same time as encouraging them on the journey. The bigger journey is the same storytelling you're doing again and again, but you need to fit into their workflows enough that they adapt to it, and start adopting it. So both are true, unfortunately. No. But again, like being adaptable is the best thing possible. So don't go for something finished and shiny, because this should never be finished. Done right, this should keep evolving with the business needs all the time. And without a lie, the amount of enterprise people I spoke to, huge organizations that were on their fourth or sometimes fifth attempt at a design system. And you can't tell me that they're not hiring really, really great designers and developers and product people. They clearly are. So there's something wrong there. And it's not about the design system. I need to get that off my chest, thanks. Any other questions? Having good news stories. I think saying case study always makes it feel quite laborious to me, but it's like through proving the value out and maybe spending that time with somebody, pairing with them in whatever way, going, I think if you work with us on this, using this system, it will help you out. You create advocates, which helps spread the word for you. And then you can say, oh, that thing that went really well, kind of buzz. So that's part of that whole thing of the evangelizing the education is non-stop. And so every time you get one person going, oh yeah, that was really good, that. I was going to do that. Spoiled my fun. But I think that's part of it, is trying to create those advocates by doing little bits of focused good work with them. Spend that time, go out of your way. I can't remember the question, but I hope I answered it. That's how bad my memory is. You just said it and I forgot. Any other questions? That's more than I expected. Yay. I mean, to be honest, keep it coming. Just because people say things, it doesn't mean you have to listen. But you should, but you don't have to. But part of it is, I think, you need to give people every opportunity to feel heard. And so they're not going to adopt your thing if they think you're not listening. If they've got legitimate concerns or you're not meeting their needs, you need to listen. How you choose to react based on that is entirely up to you and weighing up your priorities. But actually listening, be seen to listen, is massively important. And if you can give them something and say, look, we do have a huge backlog, but I would love to help you. What is the one pain point I could help you with as soon as I can? And it's just trying to be upfront and honest. You can't fix everything for everyone, but you can listen and actively listen. Silence.
So thank you everyone for coming on tonight. Thank you very much to Evie, to Michael and Dan for speaking. Very much appreciated. We have another event coming up, which will be the 28th of September. This is going to be a themed event, and we're actually co-hosting that with a client of mine. So that's going to be very much aimed at an audience of people that are in product now, that are aspiring to get into senior leadership in the next year or two. And they'll be made up of a panel of speakers that are all senior product leaders that will be giving their hints, tips, and input on what you guys can do to get there. So you can sign up there, or you can search out on Eventbrite and meet up later on. So after this, anyone wants to come along, we'll be going to Society for Drinks, about for a couple of minutes if anyone wants to grab me. And obviously, I'm hoping the speakers will be around to be grab for any further questions you might have thought of along the way, or any information you want from those guys. So thank you very much for coming along. Thank you to my team for helping set this up and organise it, and all the best, and hopefully see you down in Society. Thank you.